We've got a Skype question on a piece of legislation that's coming up. It's from Alison von der Borch in Adelaide.
Hello. The urgent medical treatment bill that was introduced would mean that the Home Affairs Minister must approve or refuse a medical emergency transfer from Nauru and Manus to Australia within 24 hours. And the Minister can still refuse a medical transfer on a broad range of security grounds. The coroner found that Iranian asylum seeker Hamid Khazaei would be alive today if he had been evacuated to Australia from Manus within 24 hours of developing severe sepsis. If security is not an issue, and they've been there 6 years, so we surely must know people's security status, who should be held responsible if there are further deaths or permanent health problems?
Okay, Karen Phelps, your legislation is in play here, so we'll start with you.
Well, this is going to be one of the first orders of business when Parliament returns next week, and it's not before time. Refugees who have been found to be bona fide refugees, who have been languishing on Manus Island and Nauru for 5 or 6 years, they deserve to have proper medical attention. They cannot get that proper medical attention for serious or complex medical conditions in those locations, and where the doctors say we cannot cope with this situation here, then they need to be brought to Australia on the advice of doctors. For too long, this decision has been in the hands of bureaucrats and politicians. Medical decisions on urgent medical transfers must be made on medical grounds by doctors, and it has to be made on the basis of urgency. There are some cases where time is absolutely of the essence, and to delay will cause the loss of a life, and this has happened.
Karen, the Prime Minister sought to head this one off at the pass by announcing he'll install an independent medical panel to look at these cases. Are you not satisfied that is involving doctors in the way that you wanted to involve doctors in decisions about what happens with sick asylum seekers?
No, it's not good enough. And what it does, it still entrenches the bureaucrats as the decision makers in this process. And they have had a track record of obstructing and delaying medical treatment, obsessively putting these cases through court. Hundreds of cases have gone to the federal court through refugee advocates and lawyers. Every one of them has been successful. Are you
saying the independent medical panel is going to be made up of bureaucrats?
No, I'm saying that what the government is proposing is that the decision-making initially is in the hands of bureaucrats, and then appeals go to a medical panel. In the legislation that we will all be considering, and which has broad support and has passed the Senate, you have a doctor on Manus Island or Nauru saying we can't cope with this case, and then another doctor, most likely a specialist here in Australia, in the way that we practice remote medicine here in Australia, would say, I agree, this can't be done on Manus Island or Nauru, and we can't give you the information or advice that you need to handle this case. Then that patient would be recommended for transfer. The Minister would have the opportunity to block that on national security grounds. If they block it on medical grounds because they say, no, I don't believe the doctor's opinions, it then goes to a medical panel, and all this happens very quickly because, as we know, if there's a medical emergency, you have to act quickly in the interest of the patient. And you must also understand that these people are refugees. They've been found to be refugees, and so they've already been through a test of whether they have committed a crime in their home country, whether they've committed a hate crime, a war crime, or a serious crime. And so that filter has already been in place.
Okay. Andrew Wilkie, you're a co-sponsor of this bill. Yeah. It'll require, Bob Katter has already said no, so it'll require all of your votes, plus Cathy McGowan, who's not here tonight and has not made her position clear, but she's under a considerable amount of lobbying pressure from the government at the moment to vote against this bill. How are you going to get, you and the other crossbenchers, get all the crossbenchers, apart from Bob Katter, on side?
Well, we're remembering that the crossbench isn't a party, we're a group of individuals, and I can only talk for myself. I will certainly support Karen's bill. It makes sense to me that when someone is sick, the person who should decide their fate should be a doctor. And it should be a very agile system that can make a decision and effect an evacuation very quickly. But I'm not going to let this opportunity go by to make a bigger point about Australia's response to asylum seekers. We have an obligation under international law, and we have a moral obligation that when someone comes to Australia claiming to flee for their life, We should give them protection, hear their claim and give them permanent refuge if their claim is correct. We're a signatory to the Rome Statute. The Rome Statute addresses crimes against humanity, and it's a crime against humanity to forcibly transfer anyone to a third country and to detain them indefinitely without trial. We have a series of Australian governments are guilty of crimes against humanity, and to answer the question from the Skype caller, if someone dies, the blood will be on their hands.
Julia Banks, politics is politics. You know, as you know very well, it's all about numbers, and in this case, it will require, as I just said, all the crossbenchers, including Cathy McGowan, now that Bob Katter's not on board. Are you speaking to Cathy McGowan, you and the others?
Look, again, I'm an independent, so as much as we're all on the crossbench, I will absolutely be supporting Keren's bill. From my perspective, a sick person who needs help, who's seeking refuge, is a sick person. I don't think this is the opportunity for the government to say, well, we've got the kids off now, we can, you know, all sit back and relax. You know, the Hippocratic Oath for a doctor says do no harm, and Australians have a humanitarian heart, and in this day and age and with this situation on Nauru and Manus, we have to make the humanitarian decision.
And part of the reason they're getting sick in the first place is because we put them there.
Yes.
And we're keeping them locked up when they've committed absolutely no crime and done nothing more than say, we want to come to Australia to seek a better life. They've been assessed to have been genuine refugees, and what is our government, with the Labor Party's support, doing? They are locking them up. And if you take someone who is innocent, who's committed no crime, and lock them up indefinitely, they are going to get sick. And we've had reports of a 12-year-old girl attempting to kill herself, like, as a result of what we are doing.
The Prime Minister obviously moved quickly to try and remove all the children from Nauru.
Quickly, please.
Well, no,
He hasn't been
Prime Minister for that long, so
every time that the lawyers tried to get some of the kids to be brought here, the government fought them tooth and nail. They had to go to court every single time. And it's only because the Greens, crossbenchers, people of goodwill have been hounding them that they've been forced to do something. And I'll be very happy to support this bill and support these amendments that we've worked on. But the next step has to be, why are we locking up these innocent people in the
Okay, just let me go back to Julia Banks' side, because the politics of this is it'd be almost like a no-confidence vote in the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, if he loses this. So it's going to be absolutely critical what happens with the votes, and Cathy McGowan, as I said, is a key one. Do any of you on this panel have any idea what Cathy McGowan is intending to do?
Cathy McGowan put out a press release today, and I think she needs to speak for herself. But she has a long track record of supporting the rights of refugees, and I haven't seen any indication that she has changed her mind.
Have you had a chance to explain your bill to her?
Oh, yes.
And did she seem receptive to it?
She's supportive of refugees, but she won't show her hand until next week, I would think. And certainly it's not up to any of us to speak for her.
Do you agree that it'll be like a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister?
It's not a supply bill, it's not a confidence motion. I mean, the best thing the government can do is to vote with this, and because it's a really good piece of legislation. It's a medical solution to a medical problem.
Karen, that's not going to happen.
Well, the government either wants to have humanitarian credentials or it doesn't. And, we are talking about lives of human beings here. And we're talking about a humanitarian crisis that has been created by our Australian governments. And I don't think it sits well on the Australian conscience to let this continue a minute longer. I think it needs to be solved. The medical crisis needs to be solved, and then, of course, we have the greater issue of our treatment of asylum seekers
generally.
Julia
wanted to jump in, and I think Rebecca as well, so go on.
I just wanted to make a comment in terms of who has created this movement to sort of bring the refugees to Australia, to a safe haven, to have medical treatment. And from my perspective, yes, credit where credit is due, and Keren's bill's absolutely brilliant. But it is the Australian people. The local people in my electorate have relentlessly and quite reasonably written to me about this situation, and I come back to the power of the people. That Australians have a humanitarian heart. We cannot see people languishing on Nauru and Manus any longer. And just to build on Adam's point in terms of 12-year-olds, these people have been here for 5 years, have been in Nauru and Manus for 5 years. So arguably, you know, an 18-year-old is now suddenly potentially exempt because they're no longer a child. Well, you know, as a mother and as any Australian would say to you, a human life is a human life, and we need to exercise our humanitarian heart on this.
Okay, I'll come to Rebecca in a moment. Not all Australians agree. We've got a questioner in the room who doesn't. Colin Siegel.
Yes, Andrew Wilkie says that if people die, there will be blood on their hands. And you said, as far as independents go, their role can be fundamental, and I believe it can be detrimental. This is what Karen Phelps, being a doctor, you adopt a caring approach by proposing refugees come to Australia for medical attention. But this opens a can of worms. Your bias will ensure tens of thousands of refugees make the dangerous trip to Australia. How will you sleep at night knowing the dangers refugees face coming to Australia by boat, with a proposed policy that is now redundant, with all children now being removed from Nauru?
Karen, I'll come to you in a minute. I just want to hear from Rebecca on this as well.
Look, Karen's bill is an opportunity for us to take the politics out of this situation, and I think it's been used as politics of fear by the government and by Labor over the years. And I would like to see doctors given the opportunity to make the decisions around this, because I think, like most people in this audience, I trust doctors over politicians every time. But what we're not talking about here is the long-term solution. This is about a temporary relocation to Australia for treatment, and what we actually need is a long-term solution for all of the people who are on Manus and Nauru. And it beggars belief that the government has not worked with our nearest neighbour, New Zealand, who have said for years that they would take a number of asylum seekers. We're spending $1 billion a year keeping people on Manus and Nauru. There's collectively, I think, around 1,000 people between those two islands. Now, I have pensioners in my community who can't afford to cover rent. I would rather we were spending money on people in Australia, and at the same time ensuring that the people on Manus and Nauru are actually able to be settled either in Australia or in third countries.
Okay, can I just give Karen a right of reply? Because the accusation is essentially that you'll open the floodgates, that more people will come in boats and they will die in the process.
I want to reassure you that this legislation has been very carefully thought through. I came into this as late in the day. We've had refugee advocates and lawyers and the medical profession and the community fighting this for 5 to 6 years. What I've tried to do is to break the deadlock by creating a medical solution to the medical part of this problem. And it's important to understand that Operation Sovereign Borders remains in place, that this proposal doesn't dilute border protection in any way, no matter what the government claims. The boat turnbacks will continue. That has been the deterrent. And if you think about the logistics of it, for you to claim that somebody will come to Australia or try to get to Australia for medical treatment because of this particular legislation, they would have to be thinking, let's say they're in Indonesia, I'm going to get on a boat, risk being caught and turned back, and if not, get through, be sent to Manus Island, where I get sick enough that I'm almost dead, and then 2 doctors have to say I have to come to Australia for temporary treatment, not to be resettled in Australia. It's really not an attractive option for somebody to get on a boat under those circumstances. This is a humanitarian crisis, and as Australians we have to take a pragmatic approach to this, and we have to take, I believe, a humanitarian approach to it.
Julia, not so long ago you were in the Liberal Party. You know the MPs who are still there, some who might be more sympathetic to this bill than others. Think of people like Craig Laundy or Russell Broadbent. Do you think it's possible any Liberal MPs may cross the floor to support this bill?
Well, you'd have to ask them directly, but I just want to build on Karen's comment in relation to the boat turnbacks. That there is no nexus between the boat turnbacks. The boat turnbacks will continue. We have to bring these people to Australia for medical treatment. It's not a permanent situation and not a permanent outcome, but it is a humanitarian decision. But to create this fear campaign that for some reason that any of us or anyone would want to compromise our strong, safe, secure borders. That is not what this is about.
Okay, but briefly, you haven't spoken to any Liberal MPs canvassing whether they might consider crossing.
No, but I do know Craig Laundy and Russell and myself. We were very, we went against the tide in terms of this, particularly in September when 6,000 doctors around Australia signed that petition, and we had meetings with the Human Rights Commission, and it was just the stories we heard. I don't think any Australian would like to would see that the water can be muddied by boat turnbacks. Boat turnbacks will continue. Our borders will continue to be secure.
Andrew, you wanted to make a point.
Well, to respond fairly directly to the gentleman, it's a good question. I think the government's assertion that the fact that 2 doctors can recommend an evacuation on medical grounds is their assertion that alone will send a strong enough signal to the people smugglers to restart the run of boats, I think is to treat us like mugs, because the government knows this is a highly complex humanitarian problem we've got here, or challenge. It's to do with the situation in source countries, the countries of first asylum, the transit countries. It's to do with push factors, pull factors. It's highly complex, and there is no one change is going to send that strong signal. So I really think the government's not being entirely honest with us by claiming that Kerryn Phelps single-handedly is going to restart the run of boats to Australia.
Okay, just quickly go back. Yeah, you've got your hand up, Colin. Go ahead.
It's something that can happen and you're not sure about it. And if it does start, you may have people dying at sea. Why do you want to put that to risk? There are not many kids on Nauru anymore. Why don't you leave it as is? The Nauruans have their own doctors. They don't come here for medical treatment. Why don't you rely on the Nauruans having medical treatment there as being correct, and therefore refugees on Nauru can also have the same medical treatment?
Colin,
and you fly doctors over.
Colin, I'm going to take that as a comment and move on. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, let us know on Twitter. Keep an eye on the RMIT ABC Fact Check and the Conversation website for the results.